for joining me and for staying for this panel. We have a great group of people here. I'm excited to talk all about innovation and where we go from here and how you innovate in this economy. I was hoping you could go down the line here and introduce yourselves, kind of table set for me a bit what perspective you bring to this conversation about healthcare and innovation.
So I'm Bob Arnott. I'm co-CEO of Health Tech Without Borders. My co-CEO is Jerome Lee, who runs intensive care units at Massachusetts General Hospital, and he was a great friend of Butterfly. And we have a unique challenge there in that, for instance, you have a 5-year-old boy shaking chills, high fever, mother afraid that he's just not going to make it, and yet there are artillery shells in the local playground, rockets just hit their apartment building, they're deep in a bomb shelter, and they have nowhere to go. So what we do is the complete delivery of digital health care. So in this particular case, we had a physician from MGH call the boy's mother, went through a very extensive exam and determined there were red spots under his axilla, and in fact he had chickenpox, which may not sound like much, but can be fatal. So they gave him the right treatment and his life was saved. In another case, we had a son call up to say that his father had had a cardiac arrest, and we were able to talk the son through complete CPR to revive the father, and he was able to make his way to the hospital. So our vision, certainly around the world, is the digital delivery of healthcare. As an example, we now are providing tele-ICU in the ICUs in Iraq, in Iraq. We have programs in the Philippines, Nigeria. We love Butterfly. I'll give you a story from yesterday. There was a terrible injury in the front line, shrapnel into the lung, into the abdomen, into the jaw. And with the Butterfly, we were able to determine that there, in fact, was significant bleeding in the abdomen. The abdomen was open. They were able to stop the bleeding, and with this, save that individual's life. Now, as a long-term sort of humanitarian on the boards of Save the Children, High Commission for Refugees, worked in the Doctors Without Borders camp during the Rwandan genocide, we're always looking for how do we bring domain-level expertise down to these local situations. And so whether it be tele-ICU or the use of a telemedicine visit from someone at Mass General, but I think that the dream is with this Butterfly catheter that here you have a child at the front line who may have pneumonia, and with this, rather than having to have a big CT or an MRI or a chest x-ray, you're able to, with this very small, inexpensive device, diagnose that that child has pneumonia. Or that a soldier, for instance, has a very low ejection fraction, or an older individual has congestive heart failure. So in summary, I'm a huge believer both in the digital delivery of healthcare, and of course I was born and raised here in the People's Republic of Massachusetts, a huge lifelong fan. And I do think that it brings medicine from being sort of one catastrophe to the next through the sort of overall digital following of patients. As an example, a patient with asthma who would have daily inhalations with a Bluetooth device, we follow the inhalations, their oxygen saturation, their FEV1, and be able to say, hey, you're getting into trouble, we're going to put you on a course of methylprednisolone as an example. So we're pioneering this certainly overseas with a dream to be able to bring the tremendous domain-level expertise of the top institutions to the poorest people in the world. That also counts for the United States. At the beginning of COVID, I was very impressed with Tony Fauci, who said that this was, a catastrophe for the underserved across the country. And the dream of being able to bring first-rate medical care with digital delivery, I think, is one that holds great promise. Just lastly, I was asked by the Minister of Culture of Ukraine the other day to put together what we would call a little kiosk in the bomb shelters. And so those kiosks would be able to measure blood pressure, pulse, we have a Butterfly echo, be able to look at people's eyes, ears, do an EKG, and do a complete examination of an individual in a bomb shelter from Mass General. So it's a great dream, and Butterfly is a very big and admired part of it.
What a great dovetail. Danielle. I'm sorry, Andrea.
I don't know how I follow that, but so Andrea Hechevarria, Head of Government Affairs here at Butterfly. Look, I'm part of this conversation. We wanted to bring some just discussion around the future of healthcare coming out of the pandemic. what's happening here in Massachusetts, and more specifically what's happening here in Burlington. You know, Butterfly is really out to transform healthcare, change how medicine is practiced by bringing the power of that information into the pockets of every physician, into every patient. And I think what's really important is that Butterfly isn't alone in the attractiveness of this area. There's phenomenal things happening, and you'll hear from Danielle. The Broad Institute is also going to be putting up a flag here in Burlington, and I think that's really exciting. So,
Thank you, Danielle.
Hi everybody, I'm Danielle Perrin. I work at the Broad Institute, which is based in Kendall Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts. So Broad Institute is a nonprofit biomedical and genomic research institute, and our mission is to transform the understanding and treatment of disease. I work specifically in the genomics platform at the Broad Institute, which is the group that's going to be moving to Burlington, just down the street at Blue Sky Center, the newly renamed Blue Sky Center. I just saw the building for the first time this morning. Exciting. So the building is under construction right now, and we expect about 1.5 years to move in and be neighbors with you all. So the genomics platform within the Broad Institute, so we have, part of our mission is really to transform the way patients are treated in a different way, a different angle. So since the Human Genome Project more than 20 years ago, the work of the genomics platform has been to develop and deliver genomic technologies, so primarily DNA sequencing technologies. And so within the Broad Institute, we're a bit of a unique group in that we're not a research group. We really are a service provider, so we take samples in and deliver data as our product to the customer, who is often a researcher, but now more and more, maybe a physician or a clinician. And so, our mission, in addition to further advancing research and use of genomic data, is really to push these genomic technologies further into the clinic and make them more accessible to more patients, more understood by a broader spectrum of physicians and medical care providers. And so really over the past 20 years, the technology has become more accurate, faster, cheaper, to the point where it's actually more relevant as a tool that can be used in the day-to-day treatment of patients and diagnosis of disease. And we're really excited to join the community here.
Thank you so much. Melissa?
Thanks, Danielle. My name is Melissa Tintopoulos. I work as the Economic Development Director for the town of Burlington, so a little different than the healthcare field. But I think what's important, and I think why Andrea, Jessica had me here on the panel, is really thinking about an ecosystem. To do what the doctor's talking about, what Danielle's talking about, you need a place. You need to start at a physical place before you enter that digital world. And what we're doing here in Burlington is really trying to create that place. And it's more than the real estate and the buildings, although that is critically important to provide that. But we think of it also as a long-term vision when we're setting the stage with land use policy, investment in water infrastructure, electricity, and human capacity. On a very local level, we've trained our permitting staff, our health department staff, so that they are knowledgeable and can facilitate projects and developments like Butterfly here in town. And we're also looking to the future. We're sitting in the district that National Development has put together, but they put some thought into this, how it can be walkable, how we can put amenities, and how we can care about public realm that is critically important to our public health as we walk about, as we exchange and have that social interaction with one another. So my passion is really, it's exciting in so many ways when I'm here today, because I feel what my work does and what the work of a municipality and many of your communities nearby here, if they're working together and they look at where communities are evolving to, they are doing the hard work now to make the zoning changes, add more housing, think about low carbon districts. And these places we anticipate will be more attractive and dynamic evolve so we can bring curious minds like yourself here to thrive and work together and create these amazing things that we're hearing about today, and in the future, Broad, as you come as well, Danielle. It's still a little bit down the line still, but so that's my role, and I am just excited to share that and be part of this conversation, Jessica. Thanks.
Excellent. Melissa, we're actually going to start with you. Thank you. I know it's an impressive group. What can innovation and development mean for a community? What is this sector of the town mean for the town at large, the region? What's kind of the underlying principle of why you do this?
Why we do this? So for many of you who kind of think of economic development on a very basic level, to be very candid, it's like commercial, tax revenue, and jobs. And that's what motivates a lot. But I think I hinted at what makes it special and what makes the environment and the ecosystem special is giving much more texture and thought to that. And not just, I mentioned a lot of what we're doing is about space, but economic development is really now working on many levels. Our state partners were here. They're working, with the federal government infrastructure dollars. And why is that important? A lot of what's been talked about lately is closing that digital divide, and that what we're seeing in some ways, the technical discrimination over time was really made evident with the pandemic, right? So what we're trying to do also is think about, as economic development, connecting to our educational institutions as well, and think about the workforce as well as place. So it becomes very multi-layered as we think about this. On a local level, it's very challenging. There's not that many local governmental interventions to affect that change, but that's why it's so important that it takes a team. Our chamber, Ken Gordon, Ken Turner. I think that's, as we think about this part, we help advocate for this because, the administration, several administrations ago did start to feed and invest in the Mass Life Science Initiative. Now Texas, North Carolina, California, they're all doing that. So what we need to do is keep the gas pedal down and keep doing that. And as a community on a local level, we're able to highlight someone like a company like Butterfly Network and say, this is what can happen, and this is what we're trying to achieve if you continue to support us. So I see this on different levels, and then also working relationship-wise with our state partners.
Excellent. Bob, I also wanted to ask you, you've worked with some of the biggest names in innovation, Apple, Google Health. What are the attributes generally that makes something innovative successful?
That's such a great question. It's really integration. I'll give you an example. When I was chief foreign correspondent for NBC News, I was in the most dangerous parts of the world. We couldn't go in with big satellite dishes and whatnot. And so Apple Computer had a great sort of Final Cut Pro editing system, and there was a satellite company that also had a way for us to be able to transmit from a laptop. So I did a project with NBC News, Apple, and the various technology companies to be able to literally jump out of an airplane with a backpack, shoot, cut, write, edit, and upload from there back to the States, and then have a piece on the nightly news. So I think it's really application. And if you take Butterfly as an example, what we try to do at Health Tech Without Borders is to really canvas to say, what are the best technologies? If we have to do pure digital delivery of healthcare, because you can't get any place. I mean, with bombs falling and roads cluttered with burned out tanks and fires and whatnot. And we came upon Butterfly as an example, being able to really replace CTs and X-rays and whatnot at the front line. We have an AI bot now, so that using artificial intelligence, we'll be able to help individuals in a trauma situation. Microsoft is a partner. They have a cool thing called hollow vision. And so that means that a surgeon at Mass General could follow the eye track of a surgeon in Ukraine and sort of say, well, no, put your hand here. Or if it's a paramedic in an ambulance, no, the tourniquet should go here. So we've assembled all of these technologies and integrated them to the point so that we will have this pure delivery of digital healthcare. But I think, talking to your CEO, it's really more than anything else, it's a vision. What is that vision there? And it often goes beyond the sort of standard surveys and marketing to sort of look beyond what people could even imagine doing. And so now to have, for instance, rural hospitals, I come from Stowe, Vermont, and we have a little hospital called Copley, I'm speaking to on Friday. And when I was at Dartmouth and at Mass General, we sort of look at these little hospitals and what do they know what they're doing? Well, now, these hospitals empowered. You have a partnership from a hospital for specialists, their surgery for orthopedics, tele-ICU from Mass General, cardiology from Dartmouth. And so you're creating these little mini centers of excellence. You have right here, of course, the Lady Clinic right in Burlington, Massachusetts. My parents got their medical care. And so I really think it's, it's a combination of vision and really understanding who the consumer is and what they want. I get calls all day long, every day, from patients who just can't sort of figure out what do you do. Like a poor woman this morning with a trigeminal crush injury, couldn't get any help anywhere. And Brian Ahab, who was Dr. Sean Carey's son-in-law, a neurosurgeon at Mass General, said, well, we're going to present her on Thursday to the entire board, pain board there, to be able to figure out what the right kind of therapy is. So I would just say that the best answer to the question is just vision, and a vision that's shared between consumer and, of course, the tremendous innovators here. Just I will call out the Broad Institute with our Mass General series, Curve, which was a COVID urgent response platform. We looked at the big innovations in COVID, and if you look about a year and a half ago, we had a piece with Broad on COVID as the king of errors. That is, it made more errors than anybody else. And so as it was able to sort of change, we saw with Omicron in South Africa, you had it wasn't the design to sort of come out and say, I'm going to attack you. It just had so many errors and was so bad at replicating itself, which we learned from Broad, that we, of course, have had these continuing variants, which fortunately have been mild this fall, but are likely to get a lot more serious this winter. So we'll look to your leadership there.
Well, great. So vision and seeing the gaps and answering them. And so along those lines, along those lines, Danielle, genomics has moved from research, you mentioned, into more clinical application spaces. Talk to me about how that transformation, how that shift has happened and what has progressed it.
Sure, I think there are a lot of things that have progressed it. I think genomics, generation of genomic data has supported research studies for a very long time. But over time, I think really the quality of the data, the accuracy of the data has increased. The speed with which we can generate this data has increased. The scalability has increased, and very importantly, the cost kind of per unit of data has come down. And I think that's very important for a clinical application because, obviously, the Human Genome Project took 10 years and billions of dollars to complete. Well, now a genome is just, a few $100. That's, obviously that's a more relevant number for something that might be used as a clinical application. And I think another important factor is, I think when you think about the application of genomics in the clinic, it can't just be raw data. I think for many years we've really, in our operation we've produced, if not raw, kind of minimally processed data that is useful to a researcher, but for it to be really clinically useful, you need to give not just raw data, but a clinical report. And so I think the analytical methods, kind of knowledge of how to analyze and manage this data has really improved, and kind of our learning about what might a clinical report look like that's generated from a person's whole genome, for example. So I think all those have been very important factors.
And that kind of leads us in, Andrea. Butterfly is doing that work now. It's shifting from, here's a ultrasound technology, it's processing in the probe, it's condensing everything down on a microchip. I mean, it's incredible. And so how knowing that you've kind of done that leap here with the technology, how then do you take the next step and shift providers to use the technology when it is something that's newer and innovative? Like, what is the argument for innovative change?
Yeah, so thanks. You know, Butterfly is just transformational in the sense that we have this amazing hardware, right? We put ultrasound on a semiconductor chip, can be put in your pocket, plug it into your iPhone, and you're essentially creating this breadth of information out of your pocket that's never really existed before. And I think what makes Butterfly so powerful is you have the hardware, you have the software, and then you have that connectivity that now for once actually makes all that information digestible, not to this expert practitioner, but to novice skill set. And I think Butterfly's biggest challenge as we go forward the next year or two is really now this behavior change, right? Because we feel like the power of Butterfly is so incredible that if you have all this information in a place that you've never had it before, in a primary care office, in an ambulance, in a rural clinic, then that's going to empower you to practice your medicine differently, right? And so how do we walk physicians through this journey of where it becomes really second nature for them, where they feel like they can't practice medicine without their Butterfly? And that's really our charge and something we're continuing to work through every day.
And Danielle, I wanted to circle back with you too, but about where things go from here within genomics medicine. How do you, what hurdles exist to take this to the next step?
Let's see. So I guess the challenges are, I think data management is a big one, and just figuring out how to process the data and deliver it as a clinical report. I think we're learning a lot about, as I said, not how to deliver the raw data that we've been delivering for years, but how to effectively manage, process into a clinical report, and deliver to a clinician or to a patient that result. I think that's something that we still have more learning to do. And I think also, the talent is really important. I'm not going to say it's a hurdle, but you might think, okay, the Broad Institute Research Institute, it's a bunch of lab staff, but really, with the goals that I'm talking about, it's a diverse set of roles that are needed to do all this work. So yes, there are lab staff, but there are also engineers to program all the robotics we use to generate data. There are software engineers to write the tools we need to process that data, computational biologists, people who think about, what's the interface through which you deliver that genomic data, project managers and product managers to interface with the customers, people who might not be accustomed to receiving this sort of data. So I think the talent ecosystem is really important, and really being able to have expertise in all these different roles to deliver this one product.
Thank you.
And I guess I should mention, there's the regulatory issues as well. So something used for research versus in a clinical setting is very different. So I think we have done a lot of learning over the past several years and have more to do about the regulatory considerations and what it'll take in the future to have more things be payable by insurance.
Right, and speaking of cost, Andrea, I was hoping you could address how you approach the cost end of this, because some would argue that as technology becomes more ubiquitous, as it's utilized more, it adds to the cost structure of when you go to the doctor. Healthcare is already incredibly unaffordable for most, and so how do you view cost as a hurdle or maybe an opportunity here to introducing newer technology?
Yeah, look, cost is our biggest opportunity here at Butterfly, right? I mean, I kind of view it at the economic side of the coin as two sides, right? You've got the cost of Butterfly, which is incredibly affordable. It's $2,400, right? When we first came to market, you had doctors who were, very well versed in ultrasound skill set. They'd buy it, put it in their pocket, bring it with them on their rounds, right? The first time I heard of Butterfly was actually from my sister. She was a PA at New York Hospital, and she, had doctors that were just buying it, putting it in their pocket, and using it. The other side of that coin, which I think is the most important, which is the journey we're on now, is that with Butterfly being so accessible and the value that it brings, once that value is truly unlocked, then it's going to lower the overall cost of care throughout that system, right? Because if you think about, you walk into the doctor, you present your symptoms, usually that doctor would pause, right? They're thinking about what they're going to do. They might order some extra tests. Now when you have Butterfly available, you have the ability to get those answers right then and there. And then what does that do downstream when you're ordering less tests, or you're able to provide that person an answer right then and there, and it saves them that time to go through that system. So it's really quite cyclical in the sense that Butterfly is low cost to purchase, but the value it provides to the overall system is incredible, because for once you have a widget or a technology that's actually not adding cost into the system. It's proving its value by lowering the cost of care and improving patient outcomes.
And also lowering the overall infrastructure around it, that you're not sending to your hospitals, facility, or MRIs, or other technicians, or administrative personnel that would drive the cost up.
Yeah.
Melissa, from a hurdle perspective for you as well, how do you keep an innovation corridor from being a flash in the pan? Like, what are the things you need to do in order to create an ecosystem that is sustainable long term, and not just something that brings a bunch of people to it and kind of peters out?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we think about is, kind of a diversified, industry. There's been a lot of talk about just life science, right? But what we have been more interested in is about the greater R&D hub. And the R&D hub, as we talked about kind of in our pre-meeting a little bit, is really interesting because even the history of Burlington has this, the high-tech corridor, and some of the buildings that we see around the highway were based out of, the technology era. It's evolved, it's gone to the software, we've talked now into life science, but what all this has been R&D in many ways. And now, Butterfly is a good example of, digital health, where we're bringing, software engineers, and Broad is too, as well, because we think about it when we were talking about this, even I didn't realize how wide-ranging the skill set is for the innovation and the work that's being done here with Butterfly, Broad. Danielle had mentioned, I just wrote these down because it was so fascinating. It was, she mentioned it already, but, logistics, robotics, it's not just all, wet lab PhD. And a lot of you guys in here already know that, but for people outside that, they don't understand that. And what's exciting for us, so we're not a flash in the pan, is, building that skill set, working with, our state partners, and starting all the way from elementary to school to introduce them to these exciting opportunities, to build internships, to work with our universities. We have, Northeastern, it's an innovation campus here in Burlington. We have UMass Lowell. And, I mentioned this digital divide, but it's really critical. If we're not thinking about people who haven't had access and haven't developed skills, our whole society is kind of going in that direction. So we think, about growing, that kind of the phases in life, and all aspects of, the workforce, so that it stays relevant. Because then I think, that's what I said about the land use. It's also, we've all talked about housing and keeping people here, but not just housing for housing's sake, or a series of buildings. It really needs to be thoughtful. So that's part of, our effort in town.
Bob, I also wanted to ask, I wanted to turn to lessons from the pandemic here. We can't ignore the climate we're existing in, the current place and time. You guys have successfully pushed the boundaries of innovation during the pandemic, I think, in the companies you work with. And so why do you think they were successful in this environment in particular?
Well, there's tremendous sort of academic background in innovation. I actually called Peter Slavin up, who's the president of Massachusetts General Hospital, and I said, listen, I've been working with this confidentially Google task force on sourcing for respirators over worldwide. And so we get calls every day with Italy, France, Hong Kong, Beijing. And I said, it's coming here. When it's coming here, you're going to come up with stuff that nobody ever imagined. I want to have a look at it. So he says, game on. And so he teamed me up with Katrina Armstrong, who was chief of medicine at the time, and Jerome Lee, and I looked through all their grand rounds, and the first thing that struck me had to do, as I was talking with the president about, ventilators. On all our calls in New York City, he said, no, we need to crank these lungs open. We need to put tremendous amounts of pressure, called PEEP, into the lungs and open them up. Well, there was an Italian physician named Gaglione who said, no, in COVID you have what's called baby lung. There's a preserved part of the lung that's completely normal. So in New York, they were crushing the lung, and they had maybe 15,000 deaths, large number of excess deaths. At Mass General, they used a very low ventilator pressure, about 4 to 8. And with that, they had a survival rate of 85 or 90%. So it was really taking that basic science and applying it. So at Mass General, they have a laboratory which is for the biophysics of lung and ARDS. And so using that, they said, no, you don't need these high pressures. We're confident we can use these lower pressures. And then I actually advised our local schools up in Vermont, and what struck me right from the very beginning of the epidemic was that this was airborne, and it required that everybody have the very high quality masks. So I bought thousands of the N95 masks for the local schools there. And we also looked at air quality. I think it's the big thing the administration missed, both administrations, was with an airborne virus, it was the quality of the air. So we had little CO2 monitors, and CO2, according to both Harvard Safe Buildings and the MIT Fluid Dynamics division there, that if you had a low CO2, it meant you had high ventilation. So I would go through every bathroom and stairway and classroom in all the local schools, find where they had very high CO2 levels, and we had a very simple innovation, which was opening the windows. And so in Vermont,
Maybe a fan or two.
a fan or two. But in Vermont, in particularly where we were in the Lamoille South Unified School Union there, we didn't close down. We didn't close the whole 2 years of the pandemic, and our evidence was safer in school than home. That was our slogan. And it proved true in Rhode Island and also out in California that those individuals who stayed home were more likely to be affected with COVID. So I think that we get amazing innovation in terms of the life sciences. I mean, these, just rocket fast development of the vaccines and Paxlovid and various medications and whatnot. And in terms of the basic prevention, we fell flat, both in terms of being able to deliver healthcare to poor and challenged communities, minority communities, and also just in terms of understanding the basic biophysics of the virus, that this was the worst public health failure in American history. And it goes on. I called yesterday for a Moderna vaccine. They said, well, go on the website. So I went on the website, and I said, well, it says there's nothing within 1,000 miles. to say, oh yeah, the company turned off the website. So it's continuing frustration there. But to answer your question more directly, it's just because, as you were saying, with Broad, it's from the basic sciences and understanding things from the genomic level up, and then the quick integration into clinical medicine, which really meant that, certainly here in the Northeast, we triumphed, I think, in terms of COVID. If you look at our figures compared to any other part of the country, I really think we won because we understood the basic sciences, and we were able to integrate them right up to, the respiratory tech driving those peak pressures in an ICU and saving lives. So, great question.
All right, great. And Andrea, given the disruption of the moment, is now the time for change? Is it a better time for change, given that everyone is kind of reassessing things and looking anew? How does the pandemic play into the broader rollout of your technology?
Yeah, look, no time like the present, I guess I always say, but look, I think Butterfly, the current environment, couldn't be more favorable to us. I mean, I think, there's some macroeconomic challenges out there that make it hard for any company, but I think given everything that has happened over the last 2 years, Butterfly played a critical role in that, right? Because for the first time now you have the ability to see right inside someone's lungs right then and there at the bedside, and what that does to understand, the prognosis of that patient, the severity of the disease, when, a lung ultrasound is, just as sensitive or just as good, if not better, than a chest x-ray, right? And the ability then, when you can now triage patients right then and there, you can reduce exposure not only of the patient if you, previously would have to roll them down the hallway, and then you're also, saving exposure of your care providers, which is something we've seen so much in, the limited resources of PPE. But I think, look, the biggest challenges from COVID and what we've seen is really the divide that Melissa was speaking about, right? It just threw out on its face, health equity, and that had been a discussion for years and years, and I think people really saw that. And I think it makes it right for technologies at Butterfly that can be so portable and accessible that there's really no walls or barriers for getting that innovation to people. And I think as we're going out of COVID and those ongoing trends of meeting patients where they are, taking care of patients in the home, Butterfly and other technologies are really right for that.
Danielle, the road too transitioned rapidly during the pandemic. You were, doing clinical things beforehand, but talk to me a bit about how the road stepped up within the pandemic, answered the call of the moment.
The leadership of the Institute set a goal for genomics platform to stand up a COVID testing operation in response to just insufficient capacity and availability of PCR tests early on in the pandemic. And so we had never run a PCR test ever before. We had never run a viral diagnostic assay of any type before, but did have CLIA and CAP certification of our lab, which meant we were allowed to, stand up and get an EUA for a COVID PCR test. And so we really learned how to pivot quickly and kind of act in emergency response mode to stand up an operation really quickly. And what we ended up building, it reached a scale that we never anticipated, and it's still running today. I think, at one point we were doing 1 in every 20 COVID tests in the country. Over a
country, not
yeah,
just,
yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, there was a point where that was the statistic, and I was shocked by it. But we were running, I think, 150,000 tests a day at one point. And that was, from a variety, it was underserved populations, it was workplaces, schools, universities, hospitals, congregate care settings. So we, had to learn to build and scale something very rapidly, and, deliver a clinical test result, which, it's a valuable learning for us now, obviously, as we look to, diversify the number of clinical tests that we might develop and advance in the future. And I think supply chain was another big learning, like how to manage a supply chain for something that patients are depending on. It's one thing if you're doing a research operation and you run out of pipette tips or something, but when you have to deliver test results for people that need them, we really had to be thoughtful about how to design the process and run the operation such that it wasn't going to shut down. So there were a lot of learnings there that I could talk for hours about, honestly.
Sorry, the other huge innovation in Bro that I want to congratulate you on is that the ability to track the variants. We actually did a piece with you about 1.5 years ago with the Mass General. Her video series there really articulating how one individual came here from Paris and ended up infecting like 280,000 people. But the ability to track really is Broad's victory, and it's been huge in terms of understanding the spread of the disease.
To kind of build on that, are those things transferable, translatable to innovation at large? The things you learned about supply chain and pivoting and being able to kind of be agile, I think is the word that a lot of people use.
Absolutely. I think so much of it is transferable. I think the test itself is very different, but all the infrastructure and kind of logistics and operations around it, including kind of the data delivery, like how to ingest an order for a test and deliver a result. Like I think all the learnings from that were entirely transferable, and we're excited to apply these learnings to using genomics to generate a wider range of clinical test results.
And Melissa, for you, in terms of lessons from the pandemic, a lot of people are working from home still, and so how have you approached that aspect of this as you build an innovation economy and corridor?
Remote work is here to stay in some form, I think. Some people have different perspectives on it, but from what we've seen nationally, most office, kind of renewals and leases are about 60%, so that means they're pruning back. This is traditional office, not kind of life science or hands-on work, but there's a pruning back, and I think some areas will benefit from this. I think an area like Burlington, where you're still in a hub, metro-wise, geographically, it's still important. But our daytime population, from experience here, is down, and we need to also think, And the businesses who are auxiliary, who support the amenities here, have also been agile, nimble, and pivoted to turn to people who are working in home. So if you look at some of these metrics that communities look at, hotel meals tax, those are actually back to 2019 levels. But the flow of people has changed. So I keep coming back to this because it's such a powerful tool, like the butterfly in the urban planning world is zoning. And so we need to make these conscientious decisions to make sure our housing is in place closer to our workplace, that public realm piece, and to allow for development within kind of an envelope that gives some flexibility so we can invite our life science, our butterflies to Burlington and not make it so create such barriers to that type of innovation. And that's through a lot of local zoning, and that's I know what we're working on in Burlington. And I think that keeps us, not us, but just any community and working with the state relevant. So
thank you. Well, we're short on time, so I'm going to ask you briefly, if you may, to answer one last question, which is that what's one change or tool that you see as being a game changer in healthcare? I don't know if you can summarize that in just a few words, but Melissa, I was wondering if we could start with you.
But I think, I guess currently, I mentioned it a couple times this morning, but that digital divide piece is really important to me because I think it can change so many lives from such, a young person's life and create so many more opportunities. So I guess investment in, skills and access to, that digital awareness will be a game changer and continue to help us kind of thrive in the future.
Thank you. Danielle?
I think my hope would be for just increased accessibility of clinical tests based on genomic technologies. I think it's not that they're not being used right now, but it isn't at every small hospital in the country. I think there's a lot that needs to happen to make this capability more accessible, but that's what I'd love to see.
Thank you. Andrea?
Look, the easy answer to the softball is obviously butterfly, right? But I think the nuance to that is butterfly being used in a way where it's truly impactful and it's used on every patient and it comes out every pocket every time, right? And it's used in a way where it becomes that assessment tool and the new standard of care.
As ubiquitous as the stethoscope, right? Says.
Yeah.
And Bob?
So I really think it's integration. There's a very interesting article showing that when you had a new finding in the New England Journal of Medicine, it was 8 years till it made its way into clinical practice. And so I think the ability to take this
Only 8.
and bring it into clinical medicine. At Health Tech Without Borders, our whole idea is to bring all of this technology at light speed together into an integrated package. And I would say that, my vision is this. I mean, having spent years in Africa and speak 3 different African languages and seeing disadvantage around the world is just, the pain, the anguish when you see these mothers who have children who basically can't be treated. And that happens in the United States as well. I mean, tremendous inequity in terms of healthcare. And so I think the real dream is that with digital healthcare, you are able to take the domain level expertise of the top professor at Harvard or Stanford and bring that down to a mother in rural Alabama or to a mother in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So it is just bringing that equality of the expertise of healthcare to people worldwide.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you for listening. This is great.
Great question.